Great job, guys. Thank you so much for spearheading this, for leading the charge. So I'm assuming before you went out yesterday that you practiced giving your testimony, you practiced the gospel message. Is that right? Yes? But still, the hardest part that I find is just initiating the conversation, right? You're going up to people you hardly know or you don't know at all. And how do you start a conversation that leads to you sharing your testimony, sharing the gospel? Well, Jesus actually gave us a really good example. I told this at a prayer meeting 2 weeks ago, I believe, that when he encountered the Samaritan woman at the well, what did he do? He simply asked a question, right? And we can do that as well. You know, it takes a little effort to prepare for what questions you think are relevant for the people you're going to be reaching that day. But a question can easily overcome any fear that you may have in approaching somebody. So this is what I'm going to focus on today. How the choice of fear, what can keep you from sharing with someone that you don't know, sharing with a stranger. Why that fear is silly compared to having faith in God. So hopefully this comes out within the sermon. So we will be turning to 1 Samuel chapter 17 for the sermon today. And this is the David and Goliath story, right? So what is the background for this? Pastor James talked about it last week, about David being anointed as king, right? Remember that? Samuel went to the small town of Bethlehem, and when he saw all the sons of Jesse being presented to him, he immediately looked at the oldest son, Eliab, and said, wow, that guy's tall and handsome, he's probably going to be king. And that's that human mindset that Israel had when they chose Saul, right? When they accepted Saul as their king. And even Samuel, you see Samuel saying, wow, that's certainly going to be king. But thank God, God doesn't look at our outsides, he looks in our hearts. Imagine if we chose our pastor or our elders based on how tall and how handsome they were, right? We would have to ask, Steve Coffey to be our next elder next year, right? And then we'd have to excuse Eric. He's not here. But realize it was such a shock to Eliab that God told Samuel to choose David. And you have to remember, David was prepubescent. He hadn't gone through puberty yet. And why I say this is, later on you find that he is in the presence of King Saul playing his instrument, harp, lyre, I don't know what it is. And he's soothing King Saul with his music. And later on in the story today, we'll find that King Saul doesn't recognize him. So there's that growth spurt that happened since that incident where Saul doesn't recognize him, which I assume is puberty, right? David looks a lot different. So remember that relationship. Also remember the relationship that Eliab now has with David, right? He can't say anything about David. God told Samuel to anoint him king. He's not going to go against God. He's not going to go against Samuel. But he can certainly be frustrated with the situation that why wasn't I chosen king? Why this little pipsqueak of a brother, right? That's how my brother refers to me before I became taller than him. So let's read 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 1 through 11. And I'll have it up on the screen also. Now the Philistines gathered their forces for war and assembled at Soko in Judah. They pitched camp at Ephes-Dammim between Soko and Azekah. Saul and the Israelites assembled and camped in the valley of Elah and drew up their battle lines to meet the Philistines. The Philistines occupied one hill and the Israelites another, with a valley between them. A champion named Goliath, who was from Gath, came out of the Philistine camp. His height was 6 cubits and a span. He had a bronze helmet on his head and wore a coat of scale armor, bronze weighing 5,000 shekels. On his legs, he wore bronze greaves, and a bronze javelin was slung on his back. His spear shaft was like a weaver's rod, and its iron point weighed 600 shekels. His shield bearer went ahead of him. Goliath stood and shouted to the ranks of Israel, "Why do you come out and line up for battle? Am I not a Philistine, and are you not the servants of Saul? Choose a man and have him come down to me. If he is able to fight and kill me, we will become your subjects. But if I overcome him and kill him, you will become our subjects and serve us." Then the Philistine said, "This day I defy the armies of Israel. Give me a man and let us fight each other." On hearing the Philistines' words, Saul and all the Israelites were dismayed and terrified. All right, so reason number one why fear is silly, that you should choose faith in God over fear, is fear freezes you, right? And in the context of sharing the gospel, the good news with someone that you don't know, you can come up with many excuses, right? I've come up with every excuse imaginable why I shouldn't share with somebody. But that, if you look at it from God's perspective, the fear is unfounded. So why was King Saul so fearful? Wasn't he king? Didn't God appoint him as king? That is true. But he also recently, if you've read 1 Samuel at all, he disobeyed God one final time, right? He did a sacrifice what he shouldn't have. And Samuel said, "What have you done, Saul? God has taken the kingdom from you and your dynasty. He is now going to appoint it to a man after his own heart." So Saul knows that God is not with him, right? And yes, he continues to be king, and he continues to show courage to his men as long as his men are around him. So he finds courage in his army. And the army is looking to him. That's why they haven't run yet, right? Because the king is still with them, they are happy to remain on their side of the valley, on the high hill, separated by just a valley. So why didn't the Philistines attack if it was just a valley? They had their champion Goliath. They should have just went ahead and fought. Well, they had fear also. If you've read 1 Samuel as well, how many times God has defeated the Philistines with judges, with few people, with no people, right? They cannot compete against the God of Israel. But as they hear and see that God is no longer with the king, God is no longer with the people, they become bold and go to fight against them. But still, they're afraid, right? And they stay on their side of the valley, of high ground. No one's going to give up their tactical position, right? They're going to wait till someone runs away before they start to attack. And so this standoff lasts for 40 days. You know, it's a weird battle where no one is just talking and taunting going on by one side. Okay. So how does this apply to over our fear? So whatever reason we give to choose fear over faith in God, right? Whatever excuse, whether it be maybe we don't know enough. I don't feel confident enough. I don't want people to laugh at me. I don't want to be embarrassed. I don't want to have a confrontation. I don't know what to do with the person if they do accept. All these weird excuses that we have pale in comparison to having faith in God and saying, man, this person is loved by God, is thought of as special by God, and he should have a special relationship with him that God has ordained for him from the very beginning. I want this person to know the joy and the love from God that I also enjoy, right? So if you see the arguments, the fear arguments and the faith argument should always win out. Amen? Okay. So fear freezes you. So let's go on to 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 25 to 32. And we'll have a guest speaker come. First Samuel chapter 17, verse 25. Now the Israelites had been saying, do you see how this man keeps coming out? He comes out to defy Israel. The king will give great wealth to the man who kills him, He will also give him his daughter in marriage and will exempt his family from taxes in Israel." David asked the men standing near him,
"What will be done for the man who kills this Philistine and removes this disgrace from Israel? Who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God?"
They repeated to him what they had been saying and told him, "This is what will be done for the man who kills him." When Eliab, David's oldest brother, heard him speaking with the men, he burned with anger at him and asked, "Why have you come down here? And with whom did you leave those few sheep in the wilderness? I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You came down only to watch the battle."
"Now what have I done?"
said David.
"Can't I even speak?"
He then turned away to someone else and brought up the same matter, and the men answered him as before. What David said was overheard and reported to Saul, and Saul sent for him. David said to Saul,
"Let no one lose heart on account of this Philistine. Your servant will go and fight him." Okay.
So the second reason why fear is the wrong choice is because fear costs you. Fear has a cost, right? What was the cost that Saul was willing to pay to live with fear, to choose his fear? He was willing to give up great wealth. He was willing to give up his daughter in marriage, meaning influence in the royal court, right? And this is a big one. I love this one. He was willing to waive taxes for your family for the rest of your life. Who would want that? I would jump at that. So it's a big price. It's a big monetary price, right? So not only did Saul was willing to pay a price, but Eliab also was willing to pay a price to choose fear over faith. Obviously, he was going, as the oldest, he had an inheritance from Jesse that he would lose if he died, of course, right? But he was also giving up that marriage to Saul's daughter so that he could have influence in the royal court, he could have prestige, and obviously the big tax-free deal that Saul was giving at that time. So, but the biggest one for me that Eliab is giving up is he had honor to protect, right? He is the oldest brother. He should be looking out for his youngest brother. And when he hears that his youngest brother wants to fight this giant of a man, what should he have done? He should have said, "No, you're going to die. Let me do it instead. I don't want you to die. You're my responsibility while our father is away." But Eliab didn't do that, right? And Saul, seeing David, didn't do that. They chose fear. So what is our cost? We have a cost also when we are in an encounter where we can share the good news. And we meet someone that maybe looks a little down or maybe a little stressed, and they don't have their AirPods in, right? Perfect opportunity to share the good news. What cost do we get? Well, we lose obedience, right? We are disobedient. We lose the chance to have a closer fellowship with God. We lose the joy that we could have with a closer relationship with God. We lose the ability to have maturity, right? To mature in our walk with Him. We miss out on peace, and we miss out on something else. I'll talk about it later. But you see these things that you miss out on. Are you okay with missing out on these things? Just because you have chosen to not share the good news with someone else. This is the choice between fear and faith in God. All right. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verses 33 to 40. First Samuel 17, 33 to 40. Saul replied, "You were not able to go out against this Philistine and fight him. You are only a young man, and he has been a warrior from his youth." But David said to Saul,
"Your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and carried off a sheep from his flock, I went after it, struck it, and rescued the sheep from its mouth. When it turned on me, I seized it by its hair, struck it, and killed it. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, because he has defied the armies of the living God. The Lord who rescued me from the paw of the lion and the paw of the bear will rescue me from the hand of the Philistine.
Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you." And Saul dressed David in his own tunic. He put a coat of armor on him and a bronze helmet on his head. David fastened on his sword over the tunic and tried walking around because he was not used to them.
"I cannot go in these,"
he said to Saul,
"because I am not used to them."
So he took them off. Then he took his staff in his hand, chose 5 smooth stones from the stream, put them in the pouch of his shepherd's bag, and with his sling in his hand, approached the Philistine. So the third reason why fear is not a good option for you is that fear hides the truth, right? And if you hide the truth, you are exposing lies, right? You're just living lies. So why did everyone think, and King Saul included, why did they think that David couldn't win? What were the reasons that were given? 1, he was too young, right? He was just a small boy versus a grown man. 2, he had no trainings. He had no training as a soldier. He had no training in hand-to-hand combat with a man who was also trained in hand-to-hand combat. What chance would he have against such a man? And 3, he had no equipment. Do you remember that there was only 2 swords in the army of Israel because the Philistines said it was illegal to have blacksmiths in Israel? They could only use plowshares and pitchforks and whatever. So they had no swords or spears. The only people that had swords were King Saul and Jonathan. So not only did he not have the right equipment, he didn't even have the chance to train with equipment, right? There was no equipment to train with. So obviously, it makes sense that there's no way that this boy, awkward boy with gangly growth, right? Gangly youth would be able to fight a big, strong, tall soldier in full armor with an armor bearer. But what did David know? Why did David know that Goliath would lose? David knew it for sure, for certain. First and foremost, we talked about it at the beginning, God anointed David king, and he wasn't king yet. So if God appointed him king and he wasn't king yet, he knew God was going to be with him until he was king, right? So he had that promise from God that he knew God was going to keep. 2, God did give him skills to face future trials, right? He allowed him to be a shepherd, which allowed him to learn how to be a good king, to take care of sheep that go astray, the sheep that needed protecting. He understood how to lead God's people. He allowed him to learn what it is to be a defender of the flock, right? When he had to fight the lion and the bear. I mean, you can't think of it as skills to fight big animals, right? I mean, really, these are miracles in themselves, that this young shepherd boy was able to fight off such large beasts. God had to be with him in that, and he knew that God would be with him while fighting Goliath. And thirdly, he gave him the talent of music, right, which allowed him to be in King Saul's court and learn how the court was run, how to be king, in the future. So God was already training him to be king, even from his young age. But the biggest reason why David knew that Goliath would lose was, he understood Goliath was bigger than him, that he had no chance, but he truly understood that Goliath wasn't facing him, David. Goliath was facing someone way bigger than him. Goliath was the one facing the giant. Amen. So, how could David, who was on the side of the bigger giant, lose to such a small giant, right? That is the choice. That is the truth behind it. So what is the truth behind us sharing the good news, sharing the gospel? Why is fear not a choice that we should be making? Because we are not sharing our own words, right? If we were responsible for sharing our own words, our own ideas, we will fall flat. I mean, it's human wisdom, right? We are sharing God's truth. This is the truth we're sharing in God in the good news, right? The salvation message, what Jesus had done, why Jesus died for us. He also gave us training, whether you know it or not. He has trained you to share with people that are in the same situation as you. So you can truly understand people and be able to express what God is offering to them, this free gift of salvation to them in a way that they would understand, in a situation that they would understand. So he has trained us as well. One of the big points is he chose us. He chose you and me for himself, even before creation. So if we are chosen by him, there's nothing that's going to separate us from him. And any excuse that we give for fear, it just doesn't hold water. Because God chose us. We are his. And we have assurance through those who have accepted Jesus Christ, who are sealed with the Holy Spirit, that the Holy Spirit is with us, right? And it's in these times of stress, of trial, of tribulation, this is these times where the Holy Spirit exhibits himself. It's not the time when we're comfortable at home. It's not the time when we're watching Netflix. The Holy Spirit reveals himself through hard times. It takes the stressful hard times, the times that scare us, that gives us fear, for us to have faith. Just like David had faith. And it is through faith that miracles can happen, right? Miracles cannot happen without faith. Faith cannot happen without stressful times. And don't get me wrong, David was scared. David was worried, right? We have like 20-something chapters in Psalms about David being really afraid of stuff. But every time he brings his worry to God, he becomes assured. God answers him and says, I'm God. I'm going to be with you. You know your fears? Don't worry about it. I am with you. So this is the truth that is hidden by fear. Okay? 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 42 to 47. He looked David over, this Goliath, and saw that he was little more than a boy, glowing with health and handsome, and he despised him. And he said to David, am I a dog that you come at me with sticks? And the Philistine cursed David by his gods. Come here, he said, and I'll give your flesh to the birds and the wild animals. David said to the Philistine,
you come against me with sword and spear and javelin, but I come against you in the name of the Lord Almighty, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. This day the Lord will deliver you into my hands, and I'll strike you down and cut off your head. This very day I will give the carcasses of the Philistine army to the birds and the wild animals. The whole world will know that there is a God in Israel. All those gathered here will know that it is not by sword or spear that the Lord saves, for the battle is the Lord's, and he will give all of you into our hands.
The king said, find out whose son this young man is. As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, I went ahead. That's it. Thanks. I didn't see my big line. Okay. I messed it up. I was going to ask you who wins, right? So who wins? Does Goliath win? Does David win? You're not paying attention. David didn't win. God wins. God always wins. The reason I allowed Alex, my son, to read part of David, I want you to see the great miracle that this situation represents, right? This small boy, this small kid going against the big, hulking soldier. Why would the small kid be able to defeat this big guy? There's no way. Only if God was present, right? Only if God was there. And we saw that if you read 1 Samuel throughout the whole book, right? In chapter 7, he uses just loud thunder through Samuel to defeat the Philistine army. Or in chapter 5, I'm sorry. Chapter 5, the ark is taken because the army of Israel is lost. And just with the ark of the covenant, it defeats all of Philistine with with a plague, right? And they have to return it before everybody died. So he defeats them there. He defeats them with loud thunder in chapter 7, just with Jonathan. With Samuel. And in chapter 14, he defeats them with Jonathan and his armor bearer. Jonathan actually says this in 1 Samuel chapter 14, verse 6. Perhaps the Lord will act in our behalf. Nothing can hinder the Lord from saving, whether by many or by few. And even the biggest example, right, where God defeated Pharaoh and all the armies of Egypt. And did Israel do anything? The Hebrews do anything? No. God won the battle. And even in this case, God wins the battle. Okay? So a miracle, the definition of miracle is an event that is not explicable by natural or scientific laws, and is therefore considered to be the work of the divine. Christians understand it as an event that's not normal, one that should not be able to happen according to the laws of nature. And this was a miracle. So what is the application for this? That fear blocks miracles. And this is a revelation God gave me in this kind of sermon. And this is for you and for me. That sharing with a stranger, sharing the gospel, the good news with someone that you don't know, can in itself be a miracle. Right? More so than sharing with someone that you do know. So what does that mean? So if we have a great care committee, right, in our church. So when people are suffering, usually either friends and people of the Bible study group or our care committee go and minister to them and help them out and whatever. But you know, this concept is also in other organizations that aren't churches, right? People take care of their own. That is the world way. That is, our church does that as well. But when you approach somebody that you don't know with the gospel, or let me take that back. You approach somebody and maybe they were suffering, right? Maybe they were alone, and then you're there giving them company. Or someone is really grieving about death, and then you talk about how God has been with you in your grief. Or any situation, right, where you may have financial problems, and all of a sudden this person offers to buy you a meal or give you money or give you a ride. How can you not say, oh, that's just a coincidence? No. That is God revealing himself in that situation. You approaching a stranger, and that stranger maybe had questions about God. God, why did you take my loved one away? Why did you allow him to die? And then you're approaching them and say, everyone is special to God, and God doesn't want anyone to die or to be separated from them from sin. And God has made a way for your relative, your loved one, to be with him forever and ever, and I offer that to you, right? Can you imagine someone that is searching for hope, and you are the one delivering hope? That is an amazing situation to be in. That is a miracle. And so why the emphasis on miracles? Why should we want to see miracles as we approach people that we don't really know, that we want to share the good news with? We'll find out in the next reading. 1 Samuel chapter 17, verse 56. The king said, "Find out whose son this young man is." As soon as David returned from killing the Philistine, Abner took him and brought him before Saul, with David still holding the Philistine's head. "Whose son are you, young man?" Saul asked him. David said,
"I am the son of your servant Jesse of Bethlehem."
After David had finished talking with Saul, Jonathan became one in spirit with David, and he loved him as himself. From that day, Saul kept David with him and did not let him return home to his family. And Jonathan made a covenant with David because he loved him as himself. Jonathan took off the robe he was wearing and gave it to David, along with his tunic and even his sword, his bow, and his belt. Yeah. So the reason that we're emphasizing miracles is that in the presence of a miracle, you have to make a choice. Miracles are divisive, right? And the giver of the miracles, who is God, the King of miracles, when you encounter what he is doing in your life, or if you're, imagine if you don't know him at all, and you, in the presence of a miracle, you have to make a choice. And we see the choices that were made by such a miracle, and the miracle of David and Goliath, right? What was Jonathan's response when he saw the miracle? He acknowledged David as king, right? And supported him based on the action of the miracle alone. And we see that by him giving his robe, his bow, and his belt. He's basically saying, you are king. I know that you are king. I have been part of a miracle myself. I know a miracle when I see it, right? I know that you are the anointed for the king of Israel. And because he acknowledged David as king, he was able to have this wonderful, loving relationship, close relationship, They were best of friends, right? This is the kind of relationship all men dream of, right? That we share everything, we cry over everything, right? We do each other's nails. No, not that. But that we are for each other, right? And we will put ourselves in danger for one another, even if it means our life. So Jonathan's response is a response we should be shooting for. Eliab, his oldest brother, also had a response, right? When Eliab first found out that David was anointed king, he didn't accept it, right? And we saw that in his response to why David was there anyway. But after he saw the action of the miracle, David versus Goliath, he reluctantly accepted him as king, right? But it's noteworthy to see that Eliab is no longer mentioned in the Bible after this. He had no relationship with David, even though he was his brother, right? Jonathan was more of a brother to David than Eliab was ever going to be. And so I have a picture up here of Alex on his lacrosse team. So to drive the point even closer. You see there's a big height difference between Alex, he's the middle one, if you don't know, between him and his teammates. And actually he's going against competitors that are much bigger than his teammates. And he gets scared a lot, right? He's afraid to go after them or get hit by them. He gets afraid to the point where he's not really involved in the game, right? And when the coach sees that you're not involved in the game, he takes you out so that someone else can help the team win. But his coach is really nice, right? He works with them in practice. He tries to build up his confidence. He makes sure that he understands what he's supposed to be doing. And he tries to get him ready, game ready for the next game. And this, God does this as well, I believe. If you truly have a terrifying fear of allowing yourself to be open to somebody else, sharing the good news, sharing your testimony with someone that you don't know, God is patient. God will be patient with you. It's not a no-go with him. He will work with you to build up your faith in your life. As you read the Bible, as you pray, as you continue to give little parts of your life more and more to his control and make him king of your life, he will build you up so that when it's time for you to share your testimony and share the good news, it's no longer the fear that's king over you. It is God and his truth that is in charge of the situation. Amen? So, what if we know that Eliab really isn't mentioned in David's story after this? So what if Eliab never chooses a relationship with David? He might as well have given Saul's response. And Saul's response is, he wanted to know where David is from because he wanted to know if he had support to be king, right? Saul was worried about who was going to be the next king. And he wanted to know, is this guy going to have the political clout, Game of Thrones style? Is he going to have the family support to become the next king? And when he finds out he's from a little town of Bethlehem, no problem, right? He doesn't know anybody, right? He has no political clout. I'll accept him into my cadre, right? But he still does not acknowledge David as king by the miracle that he just saw, David Goliath. And he doesn't ever acknowledge him, right? We know that. And Saul then becomes a slave to his fear. What about us? And this is the conclusion that we have. When we are faced with a miracle, do we submit to God, or do we refuse him? For some of you, you might not think that miracles happen, or maybe they're not real, right? They're only stories in the Bible. I'll give you an example I took from apologetics conference. That there's three ways that scientists and everybody understand how the universe is created, right? I think the first one was God created it, right? That everyone believed. And of course that is a miracle because it's God. Eventually people thought, well, maybe the universe always existed. It always perpetuates itself. It's just a big cycle, right? But we have no reason to believe that. There's no evidence within nature that scientists can show or prove that this is true. And so they're taking this as faith. So that this also is a miracle if the universe is like that. And then finally, the scientists saw that the stars are going further away from us, right? And things are expanding. And it's like, well, maybe it's the Big Bang, right? Maybe the universe was created by a Big Bang. Everything, time, space, matter, all was created from nothing to something, right? And they have no proof of that. They have no theory that is accepted by all scientists. They're taking that also by faith. And we would also have to say, well, if it's from nothing, that is also a miracle. So you see the three ways